Sue. Hi, everyone. I'm Lyn Chassagne. I'm the Senior Vice President of Marketing for BlackSky. If you're not familiar with BlackSky, we're an intelligence company. We own a fleet of high-resolution, high-revisit, low-latency Earth observation satellites, coupled with our first-of-a-kind data and analytics platform, really allows us to get customers insights fast, but not only fast, but first. So today, I have the pleasure of sitting here with Sue Gordon, who we're going to have a really fun conversation. Yeah. So I'm excited for that. But one of the things that struck me this morning is a lot of the conversation was about science and exploration. And being someone who worked on the Psyche mission that's now scheduled to launch tomorrow, that's super exciting. But we also have to realize that there is a related aspect to space around geopolitical security. And one of the things, Sue, that I've been thinking about is with the recent attacks of Hamas on Israel and just how that situation is unfolding on the ground. Talk to us a little bit about the interplay between geopolitical security and space.
Thanks, Lynn, and thanks to The Economist. I just need to say I am thrilled with The Economist deciding to do this. I think it's one of those watershed moments in itself for space, where instead of just talking about the technology, we're kind of going with the, oh, you wanted to use it approach. And we saw this in the cyber field back in 2010 when it went from the antivirus community magazines to the front page of the Washington Post and the Times, and it changed everything. So I think I'm just going to say, Economist, when this moment takes off, it was you for sponsoring this. You'll forgive me for a minute, and I'll play intelligence officer for you and just talk about what happened in Israel. It's horrific. Middle East security and U.S. foreign policy will not be the same from this moment forward. What is happening now is not the worst part that will happen. The ripple effects of this event are non-predictive and will hit shores that we can't even imagine yet. And it will affect all of us, not economically in the near term, the way some others did, but this is a big event. And one of the questions that's asked is, how in the world did this happen? You know, when we had 9/11, you could say that it was a failure of imagination. I don't buy that as much for Israel, because they certainly understood the environment in which they lived. But I do think, I will pick one thing for us and to say that I think there's a bit of an over-reliance on technology, as though if you had all the capability and if data were all available, it would magically coalesce into understanding. So if I leave you with this moment and this conference and the topic, I would say we really need to embrace use, not just technology, and embrace use as a collective, not just as individual players in this ecosystem.
Great. And you got a quick intro on your background, but for those of you that don't know, Sue actually served as the senior-most intelligence officer in the U.S. government. And so her perspective now, in her new day job as an advisor, a board member, and the other things, she's in a position to really help give us a different perspective on the national security landscape. So that leads me into kind of maybe the stage-setting question is, where are we today, and how did we get here?
So I have bad news for all of you, or maybe good news because it's opportunistic, is you all are all national security decision makers. So, I know, deal with it. No, but it does make this a serious moment, and the game we're playing serious, in that in a world of ubiquitous technology, where every technology is available to everybody, in perfect digital connectedness and in data abundance, what that means is the threat and opportunity landscape is not just controlled by the government, and the decisions and the things that we pursue as citizens, as state and local governments, and as private industry matter for this now much bigger tent called national security. I know a couple things about how you meet moments, and the biggest one is it's all about whether you see the moment for what it is and you step into it, or do you live to fight another day? This is a moment to step into. I remember 8 years ago, I was at the CIA, and I saw this young kid give a TED talk about, imagine what would happen if you could image the skin of the earth every day. Now, Will and I might have thought differently about the possibility of that. I'm thinking about it from national and global security, but it certainly was, to me, a recognition that we were at this moment. And I think there are things right now that are great. One, the technology has advanced so much. And not just the space technology, but the information technology. And so we have this kind of great soup starter. The second is governments are starting to realize that that space isn't just for space people, but it is the domain through which their interests are going to be advanced or protected. And so you start having governments, and when governments get involved, they have deeper pockets, bigger perspective. They have needs and they're persnickety, but they are important. And then the last thing is, Will mentioned it, I think Ukraine was a really big watershed for us because you saw that commercial technology, and it was both the remote sensing in all portions of the spectrum, but also the communications, was really an enabler for entities that did not have a huge installed base like the nation states. So I think we have this moment that we as a collective need to step into. And it is a national security moment. It is a global security moment. And the coolest thing about this is, even though secrecy has been so much a part of the security domain, I would say that in particularly in remote sensing, evil can't succeed in the light. Right? I think there's some real argument for radical transparency to advance our shared interest in security. So we gotta have the moment, we better step into it.
Right. So in this time of strategic uncertainty,
Yep.
How do you think about how we balance collaboration and competition?
Okay, so is it a fraught world right now? And there are a lot of competing views about who's going to win. Do we need to be more like China that has absolute focus? Do we need to decouple so we can protect ourselves? I will tell you, we have the winning approach, and a huge part of that winning approach is competition. The vibrancy of our economy, our industrial base, our academic potential, to just be able to explore, compete, find new, compete again, is really something that is incredibly important, and certainly important for all of us. In other words, we don't want to create something that is unnecessarily a homogeneous blob that all moves together, because that is just not what has created the advantage we have. And so this is where we got to run faster. But I will say that it is also a time to not just think about what each of us are doing, but to think about the outcome we're trying to achieve. Right? If every part of the ecosystem is saying, well, what's the most efficient way for me to either build a satellite, produce data, share data, and don't think that the end result is how can that be used for collective good? And I already convinced you that we are in the game of collective good, whether that is what our company focuses on is on the security piece or the bigger security thing. That collaboration is really important. And so I would say there's room for all of us to be competing for a space, but each of us should be imagining how some end user is best served by the collective. So if each of us produce data that cannot be shared by an end user without having to recondition it for use, we have failed, right? If someone uses and has a contract with my company and some adversary takes out my assets, wouldn't it be lovely if I had designed my system in a way that my assets, that someone else's assets could serve that purpose? So I love the vibrancy and competition, but I do think it's a moment for cooperation. I also think, and we aren't going to talk a lot about this, but we are the community that can do something about responsible use of space. Right? We're the ones throwing the stuff up there. Right? We're the ones that want to use it. We ought to be the best at responsible use.
So thinking about responsible use and international collaboration, how do we balance international collaboration with U.S. leadership in space?
It's a great question. I love leadership, right? I think we have been the leaders. Now, I will say, with my technological ubiquity, we can't be smug about that. And I think it is a really challenging moment for particularly the United States and the United States security community, where our favorite way of protecting leadership is to hold, right? I'm going to keep something from escaping lock. The other part of leadership is you have to have something worth holding. And so I think the balance right now in that leadership is, how do you lead now when you must allow the possibility that there are useful things not produced here, that holding is not the most effective strategy to advance, that we want to share with our allies and partners. And I think there is a piece that we have not talked about that can help us enable leadership in this space while still protecting ourselves against those who would do us harm, because I have two pieces of bad news. The first is you're the national security decision maker, and the second one is there are people whose interests are counter to ours, and they will try and use our systems from the inside to advance theirs at the expense of ours. So there are people who have counter interests. I think there are a couple of really good things that we need to think about. Who do we accept money from? How secure are our systems? We haven't talked a lot about data protection, but data protection in a time of deep fakes and AI, while AI can help us be so useful in the security space, there are others who will be using it to try and subjugate our systems to bad purpose. And so really doubling down on cybersecurity, including data assurance in that security, and think about who we allow the decision-making potential. So that's part of our leadership. And the other one is we actually have to continue the vibrance we have, because leaders are the ones that are doing the most, imagining the most, being the most provocative about use. I'd probably throw in the US government probably has to get a little bit involved in the standards game, although the government's loath to do that because here the industry has done such a good job choosing standards that allow growth. But I think we're going to have to play that out because there are some others that are using the international standards bodies to disadvantage us, and we'll have to play that out.
I'm looking at the title here, Exploring Boundaries of Tomorrow. What do you think is the biggest boundary in the U.S. that we haven't yet started to push the limits on or explore?
I don't think we've thought of this as a collective yet. And I don't think we've thought of it as what it's doing, rather than thinking of it as what it is, right? I think we think of it as capability in narrow snowflakes. I think we've created new cylinders of excellence, but I don't think we've thought about what space can be. I think about it from a security perspective every day, whether that is allies and partners who now have the ability to acquire that which will allow them and consequently us to be secure, or what Will was talking about in terms of the infrastructure that enables human activity. And I think about some of the really cool stuff that's going on with manned space flight, and could you put infrastructure in space at a much lower cost and much greater speed. So I don't think we've thought of it that way yet. Here's the trick, though, and what my pitch is really for this room and beyond this. You can't do that as just one blob. It's too big an elephant to imagine. So I don't think what we've done is yet thought of a framework or a common operating picture and a common value set that allow us to each see what we're doing, build it with all the verb and innovation and creativity and competition of our one piece, but knowing that we are also responsible for that use and outcome. Unbelievably, y'all, my background is as a zoologist. Oh, quit it. It's the pure discipline. But as your zoologist, not only intelligence officer friend, I will tell you that this is a moment of strategic uncertainty. And to a zoologist, strategic uncertainty is when you don't know what life is going to look like next, when it just isn't obvious what that's going to be. This is a moment of strategic uncertainty. I am so afraid that we are making tactically safe choices and precluding the strategic future that will enable, whether in my and BlackSky's case, the security environment, or as Will described, the social environment that we need. I just don't think we're yet thinking about that. But I think if we all each thought about it, instead of thinking that it's the capability that's going to carry the day, and I'll take it back to my Israeli friends, my gosh, did they have great capability. All the capability in the world. But you have to put it into play. It's what humans do better than anybody else. In our case, in order to keep the strength of our system, we're going to have to keep the element of individuality while we all see the same end state. I think there is so much potential for good here. Like I said, I think all the soup starter ingredients, better than I have ever seen them. I think the US government is figuring out that there is real value in pulling through commercial capability. I think that will be phenomenal. I think our allies and partners, their demand signal will be a great use for us, but we've got to think across some of the stovepipes of our ecosystem to really figure out what we're as a collective doing, and each one feel a little bit of responsibility for that. So instead of thinking, oh, this cybersecurity thing, that's just more operational expense and it doesn't really play into the performance. Well, if you don't have it or it's going to be subordinated, then it's just not going to work in the end.
So
That's it.
Last question.
Okay, I'm ready.
What do you think space's biggest impact will be to our future?
You know, I had an answer because I thought you might ask this question, but I've changed it. I'm reminded of when the first astronauts came back from space flight. And what they say is the minute you leave the Earth, you see it differently. You understand it differently, and you will never be the same. As we stop dabbling in space or using space to just modernize what we're already doing, but we actually get there, I think we will see something entirely different about how it can be used, not for all the discrete elements, but how it can be used for any advance of human activity. I'm an optimist.
And someone from the intelligence community,
I know,
that's hard.
So weird. After a lifetime of people slumping their shoulders when I walk into a room, I still am delighted with the prospect of our future. And quite frankly, seriously, this community and the vibrance that we have and the advance that you've each already allowed.
Thank you, Sue. That was so great.
Thanks.